Soil Not All, the international conference started in 2015, the same year that we celebrate the International Year of Soils. And that same year, we learned about different amazing projects going on education about soils. And one of them was the Soil for Climate, that today we have the co-founder and co-director, Seth Scan, who is going to facilitate the next session. So I want to invite him. Seth, thank you so much for joining us today. And the microphone is yours.
Miguel, thank you very much. It is an honor to be participating in the Soil Not Oil 6th International Conference. We are thrilled also to be associated with Vandana Shiva and all the great members. I first read her book, Biopiracy, in 1999 when it came out, and it was a powerful influence on me. So again, thank you. This session is called Soil Health for Climate Health, and we have some excellent speakers. Dr. Cynthia Daly of California State University at Chico. She is the director of the Regenerative Agriculture Initiative there. And Paige Lynn Trotter is a regenerative grazier working in Sonoma County in California. I want to ask each of them to make a quick introduction. The way that this is going to work, they'll make a quick introduction, then we'll each give our about 9-minute presentations. And then a little bit later, I'm going to show the trailer for the new Kiss the Ground movie. This is very exciting. It will be officially coming out in September, but I have been authorized to show a trailer of it now. So we'll do that a little bit later. Okay, Cynthia, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Seth. And I'm very excited to be here. And I come from sunny California. The Center for Regenerative Agriculture was started back in 2016. It became an official center this last April, in April of 2019. And we've been very busy working in this regenerative ag arena. So with that, I'll turn it over to Paige Lynn.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Seth. Thank you, everybody, for putting this together. My name is Paige Lynn Trotter. My pronoun she, her, hers, and I've been a regenerative grazer in Sonoma, Marin, Mendocino counties for the last 4 years. So I'm really young, really new at all of this and still learning a lot. But I'm fortunate to work with 2 incredible organizations, Grounded Grass-Fed, which collaborates and partners with Sonoma Mountain Institute, a nonprofit that I'll get into a little bit in my presentation, as well as I work with them seasonally to manage annual vegetation, and then year-round I run my own goats in collaboration with Sweetgrass Grazing, which we work together year-round, and we manage a mixture of sheep and goats for all sorts of purposes, and I'll get more into those goals and our different approaches for achieving those goals during my presentation as well. Thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you, Paige Lynn. So I'm going to share my screen now and do a few slides to sort of discuss the narrative of soil as a climate solution and of the Soil for Climate organization. Okay, so we are Soil for Climate, as the name and slide conveys. Our motto is restoring soil to reverse global warming. And we've all seen this slide, you know, a million times of the Earth from space. But the point I want to make in showing it here is to understand really how thin the atmosphere is as a percentage of the diameter of the Earth. The atmosphere is less than a piece of paper. It's really like razor thin compared to the Earth as a planet. And we actually can impact it. So that's sort of the point of that. This is from an exhibit called Exposed: The Secret Life of Roots. And you can see here, these are actual grassland plants. They were grown in tubes, and then they took the dirt off the roots, and then they put it against the backdrop of a cross-section of soil. And you see the lady there in the bottom left. It's really sort of fascinating to understand really what's happening under the ground here, and this slide really helps demonstrate it. The purpose of this slide is to show the fluxes and flows of carbon. I know there's a lot of numbers there. What I want to draw your attention to is in the bottom left. See where it says soil 2300, the bottom left of the slide in the soil part. That's 2,300 billion tons or gigatons of carbon in the soil. Then you look up, see where it says atmosphere 800. We're at about 800 billion tons of carbon in the atmosphere. So there's almost 4 times more carbon, you know, well, 3 times more carbon in the soil than there is in the atmosphere. And the power here, the point here, is that actually just small changes in the content of soil carbon can impact the climate, can impact the level that's in the atmosphere. That's the sort of the takeaway from that slide. And then this shows a sort of fluxes. Basically, what you're seeing here in the bottom circle is emissions. This is, again, in terms of billions of tons of carbon per year, so that's the source. And there are only 3 sinks, as we call them, and it's the ocean. Some gets dissolved. That's a bad thing. It becomes carbonic acid, which interferes with marine life. It goes into the atmosphere, which creates the warming loading. So those 2 are bad. But some of it gets taken up naturally in the terrestrial sphere, which is a good thing. And the goal of global warming mitigation is to reduce the amount of the source and increase the sink. So you want the terrestrial sphere to get bigger, and you want the source to get smaller. And that's the basic, you know, sort of thesis of our whole movement, if you will, is right there in that slide. All right, let's not get into long text. But anyway, you know, you can see it. The reason why soil is dark literally is because of the carbon, because of the organic matter. And let me see. And so we advocate for a wide range of eco-soil restoration efforts. Reforestation, of course, is the most obvious one that most people think of. You know, organic crops, no-till agriculture. We've heard a lot of talks about that, of course, is essential. Biochar, we don't hear that much about it, but it's very important. This is called the terra preta in the Amazon. It turns out that the people living there were doing biochar, perhaps even unintentionally, for hundreds of years. And then, of course, the role of ruminants and using livestock as a proxy for wild herds to create the grasslands of the world. Very important part of our work. And as a lot of people know who know me, I've been to the Africa Center for Holistic Management in Zimbabwe many times and have visited SARI centers around the world. And they're doing stellar work with using ruminants to restore the grasslands there. And well, you know, we don't need to look at the titles of papers, but basically what you want to see here, these are 2 papers that I combine the graphs from these 2 papers together to sort of give you a big picture. What you're really seeing here, the first paper is from Metallic 2013, the top one. He's showing that the evolution of ruminants and the evolution of what we call soil or sod soil is actually all fairly recent. It's really just in the last 30 million years that the ecosystems of the earth that we're familiar with in terms of agriculture and grasslands evolved in the first place. And it's during that exact same time frame that the carbon in the atmosphere dropped significantly from over 1,000 parts per million to around 300 parts per million. So you see there's a direct relationship between the evolution of ungulates and grasslands and the drawdown of carbon in the atmosphere to create the kind of climate that was suitable for human evolution in the first place. And then this also corresponded with the evolution of what's called C4 grasses. What we think is the typical crops, you know, maize, sugarcane, millet, those are C4 grasses. That's all part of a sort of a collective evolution of these types of grasses, the ruminants, and the soil itself. We don't think of soil as being an evolved phenomena. but it is. It's all part of the collective. And then the atmosphere itself was changing. And so we realized the importance of ruminants in that. And that's why our work is sort of largely based on ruminants, if you will. And here's an example of, you know, some of the restoration. Okay, well, I have a lot more slides, but you get the idea. So let me stop the screen sharing here, and then we'll hand it over to Professor Daly. And why don't you take over?
All right. I think I'm going to go ahead and put stop video on so that I've got enough bandwidth. I live out here in a very remote area of California. I call it part of my third world country issues with no internet. So I'll do my very best and hope that it all goes well. So here goes the video, and now I'll start my screen share. Let me know when you can see slides.
I see them now.
Great. All right. Well, Seth invited me to come and join this particular panel, and I'm actually standing in for my colleague, Dr. Richard Teague, who I think is the preeminent, soil ecologist on the planet. He does an amazing job. He's very prolific with respect to the amount of research he's published. And I'm going to talk today about a couple of key pieces of literature that I think are really important when it comes to this particular topic on grazing and its impacts on soil health and carbon flux. I think many know that 50% of the total land area on the planet is really classified as rangeland. It stores about 10% of the terrestrial biomass carbon, and it's about 30% of the global soil organic carbon. In the US, it's about 31%. Can you hear me okay, Seth?
Yes, I just wanted to advise you on the bottom of your PowerPoint, there's something called presenter mode. And if you click on that, you'll get the full screen. Yes, exactly. Yeah, click on that. Okay. There you go. Yep.
Yeah, I lose, anyway, but we'll just keep moving through here. That sounds great. Thank you. Rangelands cover about 31% of the total land area in the United States. And, this is the kind of landscapes that really provide the habitat that we need for a whole host of different species, plants, birds, reptiles, insects. It's our watershed. It's the riparian areas that provide a lot of ecosystem services. And certainly that open scenic viewscape that's absolutely irreplaceable. And, that's the kind of ecosystem that people don't often associate with cattle grazing, but it's cattle grazing that really provides that type of landscape. Rangelands covers about half of California in that neighborhood. And there's been a lot of discussion about the state of the rangelands in the United States. I think everybody is in agreement that rangelands took a turn for the worst, a lot of degradation. At the turn of the century, a lot of overstocking, drought-plagued rangelands kind of created a problem with respect to soil organic carbon. And where we are today is also hotly debated. I mean, Bureau of Land Management, the Society of Range Management, the U.S. Forest Service, all of them. There's debate as to what the overall conditions are. But suffice it to say that we're still coming out of the hole. We have lost a lot of soil carbon on all of our agronomic landscapes, including rangelands in particular. So we're still trying to figure out how we can revitalize these degraded soils. And our soil carbon losses isn't due to cattle per se. It's really due to human activities. It's our lack of management, or poor management or lack of management. It's maintaining bare soil in places where it should not be, because that certainly facilitates wind and water erosion, another big way in which we lose a lot of carbon. And we've introduced a lot of invasives that really don't cycle nutrients and hold water in the way that we would like them to. So we've got a lot of issues that are basically human-induced issues that could be changed. With that in mind, grazing lands still hold a lot of potential, as a very large carbon sink. This is probably one of the more conservative estimates on just where we are. Within the United States, the grazing lands has the potential to remove 198 million tons of carbon. And that is a pretty conservative estimate. I think the, can I move my slides? The Australians, I'm going to have to go down here. That's the one thing about screen share that I really, when I go into presentation mode, I kind of lose the ability to play with my slides the way I like to. So, but I will push through. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but ultimately what the Australians say is that, you know, we could do a lot just by changing our grazing practices. We could essentially sequester enough carbon to reverse, you know, the atmospheric, this legacy amount of carbon in the atmosphere to pre-industrial levels. This is that same beautiful photo that Seth had shown initially, and it is really an iconic demonstration of what grazing can do. The left side obviously has been holistically grazed through managed grazing. The side on the right has been set stock grazed and kind of the traditional way in which the rangelands have been managed, particularly in this country. AMP grazing, as you know, defined, it's the process of high intensity, short duration. You don't stay too long and you don't come back too soon. We're using a high density of animals in one area. So we're maximizing the pounds of beef per square inch, essentially. And we're doing that for very short periods of time. And we're allowing that same land to rest before the animals would come back again. So that's the beauty of that particular system. What happens is that through that process of grazing and rest, intensive grazing and rest, we produce a lot more feed. And from an economic perspective, most cattle producers are pretty excited about that when they see that kind of response take place. Overall, you're making a lot more feed. And that is an important criteria. That's an important thing to happen when you're looking at the economic aspects of grazing practices. And this is a picture of Richard, and this is one of his iconic papers that he published back in 2001. It's entitled Grazing Management, Impacts on Vegetation, Soil Biota, Soil Chemistry, the Hydrological Properties of Tall Grass Prairies. And what they did in this particular study that made it so iconic is that they really looked at and contrasted whole systems. And, this was in 3 different counties, and they looked at ranches that had a stocking rate of about 14 animals per hectare, 14 animal units per hectare. That would be considered light continuous. So in other words, there was no rest. The heavy continuous, they doubled up that stocking rate, and again, it was continuous, so that the animals were always, pounding that ground. Then they contrasted that against a heavy multi-paddock grazing so that the stocking rate would be similar to the heavy continuous, but the big difference there is rest. So the animals would be grazed more intensively, as I demonstrated in that earlier slide, and then moved around the property in a methodical way that made sense, based on how the land was responding and how the grasses were recovering. So when you look at that data, and you contrast those grazing systems that are whole systems, there was a significant change in soil organic matter between those different grazing systems. You can see that this particular graph, and I apologize for the graphs, but this really wouldn't be an academic presentation if I didn't bore you with some data. And this shows you all the different levels, the soil depths at which the soil was tested, and then they look at soil organic matter. And clearly the multi-paddock grazing facilitated the most accumulation of soil organic matter, which equates to soil organic carbon. So we know basically what that ratio is. So I just did some rough numbers so that you could appreciate what's going on in that particular grazing system. For every 1% increase in soil organic matter, that's increasing 0.5% in soil organic carbon. And in the AMP grazed, we gained 2 percentage points. That's a tremendous amount of soil organic matter. And for each 1% in soil organic matter, that equates to about 5 tons of carbon per acre, and you can convert that onto hectares, and about 18.3 metric tons of CO2 equivalents per acre. So that's a tremendous amount of carbon sequestration that is occurring primarily by management of the grazing animals. And another statistic that I wanted to throw out there, because I think it's a very important one, you know, as we move in and out of these extended droughts that come along with the climate crisis, every 1% increase in soil organic matter allows that soil to hold another 20 to 27,000 gallons of water per acre. And that is significant. The other aspect of this study that I thought was so earth-shattering and so cool was the fact that it demonstrated the change in the soil biology that took place because of the change in grazing management. With the multi-paddock, you can see that there's a huge increase in fungi. So the fungal species were allowed to dominate in here. So the ratio of fungus to bacteria in these soils was 3.1, significantly higher. And we know, I think everyone in the audience is familiar with the fact that as you know, we embellish that we're going to improve the amount of carbon sequestration. We're going to be putting more carbon in the soil as we improve that carbon, that fungal to bacterial ratio. The other thing that most ranchers are pretty excited about is this change in dry matter that was clearly demonstrated here. And I've tried to circle the points where I want to draw your eye. And that is in the total amount of dry matter that is accumulated in that system is significantly higher than either of the other two treatments. And clearly we have a lot less bare ground, and we know that that's really important to retaining the amount of soil carbon once we accumulate it. If we have bare ground, we're going to lose that soil carbon. The other study that I wanted to draw your attention to is this one that was actually published in 2020. And this was on soil greenhouse gas emissions as impacted by soil moisture and temperature under continuous and AMP-style grazing. The goal was to determine if AMP grazing would, decrease net soil emissions from the greenhouse gases that would exchange between the soil surface and the atmosphere. So the contrasts were very similar in terms of the types of ranches we were looking at with respect to light continuous grazing, heavy continuous, and AMP grazing. That were the primary contrasts that I thought was interesting. And the major outcomes were these. Soil moisture was higher, soil temperature was lower with AMP. All very positive things. AMP created more soil organic matter in these reports, as well as soil organic carbon, as you would expect. So water holding capacity was significantly higher. We also produced more CO2 emissions in the AMP, which was really kind of an interesting finding. And that goes along with the fact that there's more biology, there's more root structures, there's more respiration. But when you look at the entire system, the whole system, there was, more methane was being sequestered, and there was just less nitrous oxide being produced. So it was the greatest sink for methane, and it produced the least amount of nitrous oxide. So overall, it was a net carbon sink, even though it tended to produce more CO2. So in summary, I know that that's kind of whirlwind, and it was a bit of data by fire hose, but I'm pretty excited about this. I think that it really demonstrates clearly, without a shadow of doubt, that grazing matters on these landscapes. It has a significant impact on soil health and soil carbon. And adaptive multi-paddock grazing is the optimal land management tool for grazing lands. And it provides significant ecological, social, and economic benefits to the ranchers and to society. So I think we'll end up taking questions a little bit later on, but I think I'll pass this on to my colleague and the next panelist. So if Paige Lynn, I'm going to stop my share, and if you're ready to go.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Cindy. That was really informational, and I really appreciate the reminder about why I participate in that type of grazing. I'm good to start going on with my presentation, Seth. So I referenced the two organizations that I work for, and I'm going to start off by diving in a little bit deeper about the work that I do with Grounded Grass-Fed, who partners with Sonoma Mountain Institute here in Sonoma County. Grounded Grass-Fed brings in a couple thousand cattle during the annual growing season in order to manage annual grasses pretty intensely. So primarily what I do, I'm solely an operator. I rotate their cows on specific land bases. So what we're watching for is a certain amount of dry matter, or it depends on which part of the season, but we're basically watching for not full, but close to full utilization, moving cows into their next paddock, and then waiting to return until that recovery period has passed, and watching for those new solar panels to pop out. And then I am going to show a little bit of the data that's been collected by the Sonoma Mountain Institute on these different, show people how things are working out that way. I do want to say, I apologize if the display isn't adequate. I haven't had time to make a PowerPoint. I'm actually filling in for a good friend and a bit of a mentor of mine, Ariel Greenwood. So hopefully I can do her work justice here. I'm trying to figure out how to pull this up. Here we go. So Sonoma Mountain Institute, and Sonoma Mountain Institute actually has several different programs, but I'm obviously only going to focus on the grazing. But they're different projects. Goals are highlighted on their website, which is to sustain biodiversity, stimulate biology, focus on water cycling and regenerating soils and revitalizing natural systems. And there's several different properties. This is actually from the property that I participate on the most, and I've pulled up one of their monitoring sites. This is one of the ways that they monitor, is to collect a yearly image from the same site. This is pretty common data, and this is available for anybody who wanted to look at the transition, the yearly progress of spaces that are being grazed with these practices. So this is the site first year prior to grazing of the site that I'm referencing, that I manage up there for them. A lot of standing thatch. That's because before transitioning, most of the time properties are given a full year of rest. So there's a lot of extra material left over from that year of rest. And then going into that first year of management, the cattle have been able to come in, trample all of that, and start managing the annual grasses. So you can kind of see the progress. And I would encourage anybody, especially if it's in your region, and you want to participate in the conversations around, oh darn, that was this year, the grazing practices that are happening in your region, to get on and look at the data that's being collected through these images. The other kind of data that they're collecting, let's see if there's a different, sorry, like I said, I'm didn't have much time to figure out a faster way to go about this, but they're also doing transects monitoring plots that include counting species, and also plant counting different life cycles. So we're looking for perennial, trying to find one for you guys, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to. We're looking at the difference between perennials and annuals, and watching for an increase or decrease in that. The goal really of grounded grass-fed is to mimic the movement of migratory species through these spaces that are now heavily annualized. The second organization that I work with this is what I work with year round. As I said in my introduction, I own and operate my own herd of goats, but I operate alongside full-time at this point a large flock of sheep. So we're running about 300 animals total year round. And to provide context, I wouldn't actually describe myself as a rancher or a producer. I identified myself as a grazer. In the ranching world, in our more intimate community, we refer to the type of ranching we do as relationship-based ranching, and it's really approaching the land and the animals both as partners, that we need to be practicing listening as often as we're strategizing and discussing our own approach. And so I'll go into a little bit more about, I'm also having trouble keeping a clock on, so I'm going to kind of switch back and forth, hopefully stay on task here. I'll go into a little bit about my work with sweetgrass grazing, and probably not go too much more into the data collected, but the bit of data that I will share is from I'm going to go over the last 2 contracts that we've done. Again, for context, not a producer. Our primary focus as in our organization is to apply appropriate animal impact to land bases all over Sonoma, Marin, and Mendocino County. This includes anything as small as 5 acres, this up to our largest land base that we manage is 200. And this includes both public and private land. This project that I'm referring to now on my screen is King Mountain in Larkspur, Marin County. And we have been collecting data. The grazing is focused on fuels reduction. A lot of our grazing is focused on annual fuels reduction, so trampling, dry standing, flashy fuel. However, this particular project was also focused on acacia and French broom. So we chose a number of different ways to approach that and have seen a decrease in, here we go, here's the maps that I was talking about. So it's surrounded by, you can see that it's surrounded by a developed area. This is a small 9-acre project that is owned, and the hiring company is Marin Regional Parks. And then we've had a number of different treatment programs throughout that 9 acres with data collected on how things are responding. We've found, which is actually kind of becoming common knowledge now, that the French broom responds best to not being broken, but being stripped. So as the bark is being stripped, it is then dying in the following year. We can come back and graze it or trample it. With the acacia, something similar, but we're thinning it out. And then our biological survey here, I highlighted that we're seeing a 25%. The past 2 years, we have seen a biological increase of 25%. So a diversity in species, we're seeing an increase in the diversity of species. We are absolutely managing soil, and in our grazing effort are constantly remembering that the soil, it is important for us to tend soil, and the soil is actually what's keeping us moving forward, but we need to feed the soil in order for the soil to continue feeding us. So the indicators that we use to know if what we are doing is working is if we're seeing that biodiversity increasing above ground. And we also use our animals' condition and health to help us navigate the different projects that we do. That if our animals aren't thriving, then we're going to do something different. Let's see, the next project that I was going to talk about is a yellow star thistle contract. So our goals are not actually always determined by us. Our goals are often determined by the hiring company. So for private lands, obviously that would be a private landowner, or if they have a management agency that they've hired. But what I'm referring to is all of the work on our public lands, so all of our land. And that is, the goals are often determined by the hiring agency, which in this next case has been ag and open space. In that last case, it was regional parks. And then I really want to emphasize that even though I am presenting some data, that we collect a lot of information on how the grazing is going based on we're really fortunate to be in public lands. And I think that's one of our favorite things about getting to graze in public lands with the public is hearing the feedback and what feels right to people, and what people are noticing. So that's a really incredible opportunity to receive that kind of data as well. Yellow star thistle, as I said, this is an ag and open space project. So we are grazing with the mindset of affecting impacting the future seed population here. I think it was mentioned earlier that with any goal, and any goal has several different approaches. So this is the approach that we've chosen, and we're finding that is working really well. Future populations are declining. Yellow star thistle, it is a taproot. It is sequestering carbon in a season where a lot of things aren't. So we feel it's important to let it do that process, but then to decrease it, keep it from monoculturing further in the spaces where it's taken over, and it is the only pollinator and the only standing green material. So this image here is a perfect example of that. All of the annual vegetation has died off, dried up, and so when we're going through and trampling that field, we're also going through and we're nipping all of these yellow flowers off of. This is the yellow star thistle on the right after grazing. This is the yellow star thistle on the left. The project that we just came out of is in Nuns Canyon. It burned in 2017. Seeing a dramatic, yellow star thistle response in these big, this is a 50-acre meadow in this canyon. So we hiked our animals in and then grazed it. Actually, we grazed it right to left this time. And did exactly what you just saw. We took off these yellow star thistle seed heads with our sheep and goats. We trampled dry matter along the way, so we're still reducing that flashy fuel. If there was another wildfire, it would hopefully not burn quite as hot or as fast, protecting the canopies of our oak trees and so on and so on. But that is the target goal for this specific project. It doesn't, and it's really defined by the season. We do green season management, which is focused more on that nutrient cycling, feeding the soil, getting that vegetative material through the rumens of our animals, and then feeding it back to the soil biology. You can see here again, these are those yellow star thistle flowers that we're going off of, and not having enough time to, I wish I would have had time to pull pictures from last year. This is this year's population, and we've seen what we're hoping are, the monitoring hasn't been done, but what we're thinking is it was about a 50% decrease, 25 to 50% decrease, because we brought in 300 animals last year and it took us 52 days to accomplish the goal of taking out 95 to 100% of the yellow star thistle flowers. This year when we went in, we were there for just under 20. We herded out of the canyon on the 28th day, achieving that same goal and with 30 animals less. So the population of the yellow star thistle, based on that observation and timing, we're hoping has decreased in population, but we'll see after the monitoring is done. The last thing I wanted to touch on before, and I'm going to try to, again, I don't know for sure. Seth, can you give me a thumbs up if I have a couple more minutes, or am I totally over?
I kind of think we're out of time, but was that just like a cute video you wanted to show with the dog? We can always make room for that. It was a, here, I'll just pull it up real quick. Yeah, just real quick. You have to move on. Acknowledgement of the work that I do is in reference to soil, not oil. We are highly focused on the soil, but we do use oil. We transport these animals around using a semi-truck and trailer. This year, we made a high intention of creating land connectivity as well as community interaction. We feel like that's becoming a very necessary aspect to promoting and understanding the ecology of disturbance on the landscape. And through that connectivity, we've been able to develop circuits in several places. So we're herding through the roads with support of our communities in order to decrease the necessary use of fossil fuels to make grazing on a fragmented landscape possible. And that was just something I just felt like acknowledging before my presentation was done. But that's it. Paige-Lynn, thank you very much. I'm applauding you for that. I'm so glad that you just showed those last set of slides, because honestly, that was sort of heartwarming in a way. And that's kind of what makes it real, animals literally walking across the road. And, Professor Daly and I, we do a lot of stuff in our heads and on the computer and with the spreadsheets and all that. But you're out there moving the animals. And so really, God bless you. I mean, that's what makes it all real. Miguel, Jason, you want to just tell us real quickly how much time we have left, and if there's questions from the audience that we could field. I need just a couple more minutes to show the Kiss the Ground trailer. That's very exciting. That's about 2.5 minutes, so I'll need to do that. You have until 3:30. I'm 3 hours ahead, so 6:30. So we have a whole nother 20 minutes, you're saying? Okay, we have about, now are there questions from the audience right now? We can take them if there are. You can just let us know. In the meantime then, so in a minute I will show the Kiss the Ground trailer. But Dr. Daly, let me get back to your presentation. You're in the Center for Regenerative Agriculture, and you started it. But in fact, this is a session on climate. And in your experience, how is the narrative changing, or do you get calls a lot to talk about climate, or to, what's been your experience in your ag field of the climate conversation? How is it literally impacting your life, as an academic in the world?
That's a really interesting question. I'm not sure you're going to like the answer. Frankly, a lot of the farmers that I work with are interested in going down that path from an economic perspective. Probably it's a little to do with climate and little to do about carbon sequestration. And it's really all about the economic aspects of what regenerative farming and regenerative grazing can bring to the picture, bring into the equation. That's the reality of farming today. Where a lot of folks are operating on very narrow margins, and so it's really important that they're economically efficient. But the beautiful thing there is once they get hooked, and once they start going down that path, not only do they see the economic benefits, but they also see the ecological benefits and how that fits into that bigger picture. And pretty soon all those lights start to go on, and then they become really good ambassadors that can help us in this farmer to farmer type peer network that is really crucial to any paradigm shift in the industry. So we're really elevating our growers that are really switched on in this whole regenerative ag arena. They're the ones that we want to put up front and put out there in front of other farmers, because they really talk the talk. They understand the culture, they understand the language. They're the ones that are really going to make this thing happen.
I hear that. I visited, I have visited with lots of ranchers who, quite frankly, are on the conservative side of the political aisle. But they have some of the best soil carbon in the world. And they're being profound climate activists, whether or not they want to acknowledge that. So let's show the Kiss the Ground trailer now. This is an exciting moment. This is a special movie. It will be officially released in September. But I've been authorized to show the trailer now. This is produced by the Kiss the Ground folks and our friend John Rulak at Nativa and Re-Botanicals and some other generous producers have made this movie possible, narrated by Woody Harrelson from Cheers fame, has Alan Savory, Gabe Brown, lots of people you'll recognize. So let me share the screen, and I'm going to show that trailer now. It's about 2.5 minutes.
There's so much bad news about our planet, it's overwhelming. The truth is, I've given up. This is the story of a simple solution, a way to heal our planet. The solution is right under our feet, and it's as old as dirt.
All of our soils that are under chemical conventional agriculture are almost completely devoid of microorganisms.
Modern agriculture was not designed for the betterment of the soil. Fossil fuels are by no means the only thing that is causing climate change. When we damage soils, carbon goes back to the atmosphere.
But when we destroy soil, it releases carbon dioxide.
Biosequestration is using plants, trees, and techniques of grazing and farming to capture carbon and store it in the soil.
We can fix a lot of our climate issues if we bring the CO2 down into a living plant and put it back into the soil where it belongs.
Plants working with soil microorganisms, it seems too simple.
Healthy soils lead to a healthy plant, healthy human, healthy climate.
There could be a way to eat food that heals the planet.
The problem isn't the animal. The problem is where the animals are at.
How do we take waste and repurpose and reuse it, because it's really not waste?
The poop has to stay in the loop.
Compost is just one of a suite of soil-based carbon capture solutions.
We know how to do it. And if we continue to scale over 30 years, we can reverse global warming.
We can get the Earth back to the Garden of Eden that it once was by regeneration.
To see biodiversity return to a place that was completely devastated.
That gives me hope.
Our health and the health of our planet are connected.
If you look over here, my neighbor's land that has been chemical fallow, then you look over at our paddocks, you have a diversity of different plant species. Which model do you want your food to be produced from? The answer is pretty simple to me.
I'll make you a deal. I won't give up, and neither should you.
How about that, huh? Does that look like a pretty exciting movie? Patron, you can take yourself off mute, and Cynthia, you can take yourself off mute. What do you think about that?
I think it's going to be a great piece. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, yeah. So
I've actually seen it, and it's really good.
Yeah, it officially comes out in September, and as soon as next week, they're going to announce which, you know, who's going to be providing the movie. So, is there a question, Mark, Jason? Is there a question from the field here? We've got about 10 more minutes left.
No.
Okay, all right. So, so then I'm going to continue to lead the discussion. Pagelin, is there an educational or sort of meet the public aspect of your work?
Absolutely, Seth. There is, I mean, we budget into our program time to interact with the public because of the amount of space that we take up on public lands. But we also host a yearly event called the Transhumans Festival. We were unable to do it this year on account of the COVID pandemic, but for the last 2 seasons, we've been able to host the Transhumans Festival, where we actually bring the sheep through downtown Petaluma. That's kind of our home region, and herd them through the streets to, this is actually an image of that, to a small public property in downtown Petaluma, where the public is able to gather and then take the time to learn more about the ecology of grazing, as well as just connect with one another, connect with your local grazier, your local farmer, everybody who's implementing all these different tools to really regenerate our soils. And I'm sure there's other ways that we take that opportunity to educate and interact, and also listen to the public that we graze for. Does that answer your question?
I was on mute. Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Cynthia, what about sort of the same thing on your end? Does your department sort of have like field days or something like that, where the public and the producers get together somehow?
Yeah, exactly. If you go to our website, you go to the events page, you'll see a whole host of events. They would be our events that we sponsor ourselves, and like-minded groups and campuses and other organizations that are also sponsoring workshops and field days that we feel are really relevant material for producers and for our students and campus community. So yeah, we have a huge educational component to the work that we do. We're also in the process of developing a professional course series in regenerative agriculture, and we are partnering with several of our demonstration with our mentor farmers. We have many that will be participating in this professional course series, so we can combine theory together with practice and kind of bring that together and show how important that truly is to this whole effort.
Now, you've all seen in the news recently about the wildfires. You know, last year when there was the Paradise Fire, you know, everyone in the country was looking at that. You know, Chris Kirsten, one of the outreach directors and trainers with the Savory Institute, like, his home was destroyed in this fire. I mean, it doesn't get more real than that, right? One of the lead advocates for regenerative grazing and for, like, using animals to remove fuel and to be integrated in ecosystem management, his home, he's lucky to survive. Like, his home was destroyed.
Right.
Now, you know, they have to, you know, do a GoFundMe and build a new home. I mean, it doesn't get more real than that. I mean, what does it take to get policy people to understand the role of ruminants properly managed to mitigate wildfires and to mitigate drought and to be a source of eco-restoration? And what are the steps to elevate this conversation?
You know, I think clearly it's public grassroots pressure. I think are going to be huge. I mean, climate change and the climate crisis is not news. It's a problem, and it's just a non-starter, I think, with a lot of policy folks. The good news is that, you know, this last year through the California Department of Food and Agriculture, they put like $28 million out into the industry to do carbon smart, climate smart, regenerative type farming practices. That's exciting. Now with COVID, you know, we went from like a $5 billion overage to what, a $57 billion deficit. I have no idea exactly what that's going to do to these climate beneficial programs that are like really critical right now. I mean, essential. They should be essential. But because of the crisis, I think that it's going to take a back seat, and we may not see as much money get pushed out into the industry. You know, that's really critical money that really incentivizes producers to go down that path. That takes the risk associated with, you know, trying something new away if they're paid to kind of do those practices for the first 2 or 3 years. That's really how long it takes to kind of work into a new production paradigm. And if they're given the funding to do that, it takes the risk away. So it helps push that paradigm forward. Anyway, please call CDFA and call the governor and tell him that we really need to see that money get pushed into the Healthy Soils Initiative, especially here in California.
And, you know, I just wanted to add something too, Paige, when you were talking about what was it called? The thistle, the star
thistle.
The star thistle. So, you know, I do a lot of work in Kenya. And the problem there and in America and around the world is morning glory, right? And it's just everywhere now. I mean, it's, once you know what to look for, you just see it everywhere. The whole landscapes are covered with morning glory. And the whole narrative is that this is an invasive species, right? It invaded. And, you know, we have to start to change that language. I say, no, it was invited. You bent over backward. You did everything you possibly could to invite this species here. And the official policy recommendation on the Kenya Department of Agriculture, Ministry of Agriculture website, and I'm not blaming them. I'm sure it's every country in Africa and the United States. The official policy recommendation is to cut it up with a hoe, to go out there manually. We were talking, you know, millions of square kilometers, right? Go out there with a hoe, and then after you cut it up, put literally paint with a brush, glyphosate on the roots. Hose and glyphosate. That's the official government recommended policy on how to deal with the quote unquote invasive species. It's beyond imagination. Meanwhile, we're out there, Dalmas and I, and he's just moving the livestock, just forcing them to just walk over it, and you could hear the crunch, crunch, crunch. You could hear the twigs, you know, and then and then after they break it down, you know what, there is grass under there. And then they stay and eat the grass, and then they poop all over. And then next year there's going to be healthy grass there. So they're mitigating that invasive species crisis without a drop of manual labor and without a drop of glyphosate or other herbicide. And and it's like fire mitigation, you know, invasive species mitigation. Anything that either you or Pagelin want to add to that, because Pagelin, you're technically being hired for fuel reduction. So anything you want to add to that with just a couple minutes we have left?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Seth. I really think it speaks to just the necessity of these animals on the land. That if we don't provide what has historically kept vegetation in check and maintained that kind of, I think maybe the video called it the Garden of Eden, but that landscape of abundance and productivity that's going to continue to sequester carbon and offer us those really important eco services, we have to support animals being put back on the land. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to come from a pretty resilient generation of grazers who's pretty determined to do it regardless of funding, but making sure that the financial support is there does make it a lot easier. So that's really what I think of when you bring up those species. We call them our target species. It's easy as a sheep and goat grazer that is often going after the stuff that cattle won't eat to remember. It's a symbol of how important diversity is. Cattle play a really important role in this industry and in our society, and they make it possible to feed a lot of people. But also, if the land doesn't respond well to that, then we need to open our eyes to adding more diversity into those systems, and hopefully get diversity in response with that approach. So,
right on. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that the winds are changing. I'm seeing more of our government agencies inviting grazing animals, ruminants, into places like that for fire and fuel control. So we're seeing that, and we're seeing more controlled burns as well, which I think is also key. So I think things are changing. I think they have to change, and I think that they are. And I really appreciate the work that Paige Lynn is doing in that arena. You're pushing the envelope. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for what you do.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you guys for what you do. We really reap the benefits of your educating people and putting this information out there. And we're really appreciative.
All right, well, it's a mutual thing. I mean, we help influence policy, but you create the precedent that the science and the policy is based on. Okay, well, it is 6:30 and it's time to wrap up. So thank you, Pagelin. Thank you, Dr. Daly. It's been an honor to do this session. Thank you, Miguel and Mark and Jason and all the other administrators of this event. And see you online and see you next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.